Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel. In today's video, we're going to continue on my series on the third generation Tacoma. In this video, we're going to be covering the brakes and the suspension. But before we get started, if you're new to the channel, welcome. Consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. If you are a returning subscriber, well, thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Let's start with the brake system of the Tacoma. Things are ancient for the most part with the brake system. It's just a standard good old, ABS, master cylinder, vacuum brake booster, nothing really special. Everything retained the same ancientness. Yes, the engine was high-tech. Yes, the transmission is high-tech, and the four-wheel drive system got a little bit of stuff from the 21st century. But as far as the brake goes, everything is very ancient and old. However, there is one thing that is interesting about the brakes. If you have a model with crawl control, the brake system will be completely different. It won't be an ancient 1955 Chevy master cylinder with a 1955 Chevy brake booster. It's actually going to have a hydraulic booster, similar to the 5th generation 4Runner. Now, the reason they went with that is, in order for the crawl control to work, which basically all the crawl control is, we talked about it a little bit in the previous part about the four-wheel drive. The crawl control is basically cruise control for off-roading. The car is going to control, the computer is going to control the braking and acceleration, and it's going to kind of hold you at a steady speed. And in order for the brakes to be able to sustain that high pressure of braking all the time for a long period of time, they needed that hydraulic unit. The ABS that is in the current Tacoma, like this one doesn't have that hydraulic booster. It can hold the brakes for a little bit, but not for a long time, because it just doesn't have a big enough motor and it doesn't have accumulator. So the thing with the brakes with the hydraulic booster, they have an accumulator that the pump pressurizes. It's kind of like a reservoir for high pressure. So it has that reservoir. So when you have high demand, like you need to hold the truck, you're hanging halfway in a sticky situation with a off-roading, and you're using crawl, you need to hold the brakes for a while, or a lot, to hold the truck from rolling downhill, for example, or when you're using hill start, which is another option that they have. That accumulator helps the system keep up. So as the motor is running, it's charging, it has some kind of a reserve, because the regular ABS pump just doesn't have that reserve. So that's the only two systems on this Tacoma. Most of them will have the standard good old master cylinder with a vacuum booster. And one thing that is additional that we actually did not cover on the engine, because of the engine's direct injection, there is a vacuum pump to supply vacuum when vacuum is low, vacuum generation from the engine is low in certain situations. That vacuum pump actually feeds the brake booster in those cases where the vacuum is low from the engine. So that guy would generate vacuum, if you would. And that is also driven by the camshaft, nothing really fancy about it. It's just a good old vacuum pump. And the suspension, when you read the wording and the advertising when the third generation Tacoma came out, things are improved and different and redesigned and all this stuff. Folks, let me translate that in English. It's exactly the same. Yes, things might have improved slightly. This shape changed a little bit. We fixed this common problem here and there, but everything is identical. And instead of just explaining why they're identical and talking about the brakes and all this, let me go and show you. Let's start with the front brakes and suspension and then go to the back brakes and suspension, including why this Tacoma still have drum brakes. Let's look at the front brakes of the Tacoma. Now, this style brake, you have two pads, two pins that lock the pads in, and then those two pins have another pin that locks them. Now, in the previous generation, some of the models had small little pins that locked each one individually. On this one, this is more similar to the 5th generation 4Runner with this big pin that locks both upper and lower pins. This anti-rattle clip right here is very similar to the 5th generation 4Runner and actually similar to the previous generation as well of this truck. Things are not really updated here. Yeah, maybe the mounting plate changed a little bit, mounting points changed a little bit, shape-wise changed a little bit, but the operation is still the same. They still lock up like normal business as usual. One tip about this caliper, if you own one of these trucks, if you, especially if you live in the Rust Belt, and you notice there's a little bit of rust on this one already. This is not a new truck. If you take these pins out, clean them up, take the pads out, clean everything up, make sure everything moves correctly every year, you'll actually extend the life of these calipers by a lot. Now, after this caliper, there's this little hydraulic line that connects to the flexible hose. Everything is very simple. The rotor does not have any mounting bolts, or nothing really changed in this department at all. Let's talk about the suspension. Things did not exactly change. Yes, the dimensions might have changed, slight improvements here and there, but the overall design is very similar. You got one upper control arm with a ball joint on it. Then it's connected to the kind of the arm of the knuckle. This is one piece with the knuckle. This is still steel. A shock absorber right here, a strut with the coil spring, and a mount on top with 3 nuts holding it. Lower control arm. The strut connects to the lower control arm. The rack and pinion connects on the other side. You get a sway bar link right here that connects to the sway bar. And really, for lack of a better term, it is ancient. It is great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. So why would they completely redesign the suspension if everything works beautifully? And it does. Really, folks, everything is really simple here. Very easy to work on, very easy to service, nothing really fancy. The one thing I want to bring to your attention is the TRD Pro model. Now, the TRD Pro model has exactly the same setup, except the spring and the shock are different. It'll have a longer spring, and then the shock will be a Fox shock, but everything else is exactly the same. Nothing really majorly different or anything. The axle connects to the knuckle, and the bearing is right here. Things are exactly the same as they were before. I mean, you would read in Toyota's literature that, well, this is new and improved, this is different, this is a new design. It's not new. Everything is exactly the same. Welcome to the real world, folks. If it looks the same, works the same, it is the same. If you change the thickness of one piece of metal, that doesn't make it a different metal. That doesn't make it a different part. Everything here is the same. The steering rack remains in the same place, or it's kind of difficult to replace because it goes through the frame, and that's the one thing about the Tacomas. Having said that, let's move to the rear and see how that is. Welcome to the rear brakes and suspension of the Tacoma. Let's talk about the brakes first. We have drum brakes. So many people wonder, why does the Tacoma in 2021, when almost every single car out there and truck have moved away from drum brakes, why does the Tacoma has drum brakes? And to make a long story short, I will give you one simple answer that pretty much Toyota will tell you. If it ain't broke, why fix it? The brakes on the Tacoma work great. If you put disc brakes here, now every 30, 40, 50,000 miles, you're going to have to replace the pads, or resurface the rotors, or replace them, and all this mess. Well, these drum brakes will easily last 100,000 miles, even more, and the brakes will be perfectly fine. Why would you replace something that works, that is dependable, that is maybe old school, but it works? These brakes, in combination with the fronts, are more than capable of stopping this truck, as you will see in the driving section of this video. Now, having said that on the drum brakes, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's the main reason. Why would they change everything and make a whole new design and have to change really a lot in the truck to accommodate the disc brakes? It's not as simple as just slap them on. Just to have slightly better brakes, and they probably did the testing and thought, well, it ain't worth it. Forget it. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? Let's move on to the suspension. You have leaf spring suspension in the back. This is something that is with trucks, and potentially the 2022 Tundra will change that with springs instead of leaf springs, like regular coil springs. But the leaf springs in the Tacoma you'll notice one thing. If you remember, in the previous generation Tacoma, there was a recall on the leaf springs, and these holders of the leaves, there used to be only 2. Now there's 3, and on the other side as well. That is what changed. This is a new style leaf spring. Folks, these leaf springs, other than rust killing them, you'll really not ever have to do anything with these. They will easily last the life of the truck unless you overload it, or something hits it, or otherwise it gets damaged, or the truck has 400,000 miles. It's a very reliable design, so why change it? Again, we go back to, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The suspension of the Tacoma in the back is so basic. It is unbelievable how basic things are here. They're super easy to work around, very reliable, and just there is a lot of empty space. If you notice, there's not much here. Here is the big old rear end. You got the leaf spring connected to the rear end. You have your shock right here connected to the bottom and connected to the top, to the frame on the top, to the rear end at the bottom. And you got a brake line that runs through here, 2 flexible hoses, and that pretty much sums the rear suspension, folks. There's not much to the Tacoma. The Tundra will have a little bit more. The Sequoia, for example, or 5th generation 4Runner, it'll have a lot more in the rear end because it has coil springs. Because it doesn't have the leaf springs, it needs another arm to support the rear end, and all this, I don't want to call it complication, but it's more stuff. In the Tacoma, old school, very old school, and this is something about the Tacoma that, yes, it has the high-tech engine, yes, it has the high-tech transmissions, but when it comes to other stuff, it is as old school as they come. I mean, this is why this Tacoma is reliable. There's not much here, so there's not much to break. Just like the simple laws of reliability, the simpler it is, the more reliable it'll be. And the more you make it, the more you improve on it, the better it'll be. So now that we've talked about the front brakes, the rear brakes, and all that good stuff, let's take the Tacoma for a quick drive and see how the brakes and suspension feel. I'll share with you my opinion on them. Well, let's talk about the suspension and the brake feel driving the Tacoma. Now, again, I said this previously in the series, the Tacoma makes absolutely no effort to be luxurious, comfortable, or kind of a family truck. No, it's a truck. It drives like one. It feels like one. It is rough. It is not smooth. It's smooth enough. It's not uncomfortable, but you go over bumps, it's just bumpy and you feel that weight. You feel like you're driving an old school body on frame truck, that there's no mistake in that. And the other thing is the brakes. The brakes are good. And people have had concern over the rear drums when we talked about it. Folks, those concerns are unfounded. Like I said, the rear brakes, they last forever. You will easily get over 100,000 miles, if not a lot more than that, with the rear brakes, with the rear drum brakes. The front brakes, we talked about it, they have their issues, but for the most part, you press the brakes, there's no giant nosedive, not like the 4Runner. This is one area that the Tacoma is better. The brake feel in general feels solid. The 4Runner sometimes tends to be on the softer side with the brakes. The Tacoma does not. It just has normal brakes. There's no nosedive. You slow down. It's not a dramatic event, if you would. But the suspension, you feel when you have nothing in the bed, you feel that back end kind of hoppity hop, if that's the word I want to use here. But you feel that, and the suspension is very numb. Of course, this is not an athletic truck in any way, shape, or form, and it'll never be, and it was not designed to be. So it's going to be your average truck. It'll tend to do one of these dealios every once in a while, and when you go over bumps, you feel them. It's not rough or unbehaved, but you feel it. It's a truck. It just shakes the whole body because it's a body on frame, and the cab is just basically attached to it. And the steering wheel is huge on the Tacoma. It's like the 4Runner, and it's heavy. It's old school power steering. There has been nothing really have changed with the power steering since the previous generation. It's exactly the same. It's heavy. It's not over assisted. It works great and it'll probably never give you problems at all. So the overall feel of the Tacoma, after with everything said and done, is not very comfortable. I'll give you that. You take a very long trip in a Tacoma, it's not the most comfortable truck. Of course, the 4Runner will be more on the softer side. It doesn't have leaf springs in the back, but again, this is a truck with a bed. You can use that bed, and that's why there's leaf springs in the back, as we said. But overall, it's a pleasant drive. It's the thing that makes this special is the fact that it's old school and it feels like it. There is no mistaken. There is no truck in the market that drives like this. It just feels like a 15-year-old truck. The way the steering feels, the way the handles the bumps and takes the roads, is overall generally stable for a truck, but it's not a speed racer, and it'll never be. And if you think it should be, please don't make Toyota change the Tacoma for us, because then it wouldn't be the same. Well, there you have it, folks. That's your Tacoma suspension and brakes. I love the Tacoma, folks. Don't you at this point? The thing has gotten some good upgrades, but it's still underneath an old school truck. Having said that, there is one more part in this series, and the next part of this series will be about a few odds and ends of the Tacoma that you might have not noticed. And in the next part of this series, which is the last part, I will share with you my personal opinion of the Tacoma. I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you liked it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some of my other videos. And until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.